Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we're going to discuss the Bitcoin dominance. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. As I mentioned yesterday, we are running a sale. We're going to only run it for 1 or 2 weeks or so make sure you check that out. Lock in lower rate. Links in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, the Bitcoin dominance is something that we have been discussing for a long time. And really, since the bear market first began, I shifted my views to be very bullish on the Bitcoin dominance. If you think back to Q1 of 2022, one of the things we said back then was that altcoins are risky. And we've reiterated that ever since. And the whole idea with regards to the altcoin market is that they are risky on their USD pairs, obviously, but that they're always going to be risky on their USD pairs, right? At any point in the future, altcoins are always risky on their USD pairs. Now, sometimes you could argue that the potential returns at the time are justify the risk, but then at other times you could say that they don't. But I will remind you that the altcoin reckoning is more in reference to their Bitcoin pairs. Now, again, you might argue, who cares about their Bitcoin pairs? If you go buy an altcoin and it goes up 5%, isn't that a win? And to me, the answer is no, if Bitcoin went up by a much larger margin during that time period. For instance, if your altcoin went up 10% and Bitcoin went up 20%, then you took on more risk and got less reward. You always must consider what is your opportunity cost. If the altcoins that you hold are just systematically bleeding back to Bitcoin month after month after month after month, then you must stop and ask yourself, why take on extra risk, the idiosyncratic risk of every individual altcoin, when Bitcoin is outperforming them? We must ask ourselves that. If you do not ask yourself that, then you can look back at your portfolio after a couple years of being altcoin heavy during the bear market year and the pre-halving year and find that not only are the altcoins that you hold down on their USD pairs, but they also might be down 50, 60, 70, or 80% or more on their Bitcoin pairs. And that, I think, is really the main point that we want to talk about is there's opportunity cost. A dollar here is not a dollar there. Okay? And that is something I continue to hammer home. It's interesting because in ITC Premium, one of the things I said throughout all of 2022 is that the absolute earliest that altcoins could be justified based on just historical movements would be December of 2022. That to me, that was the earliest that they could be justified. Now, there's always going to be some that will outperform or they will put in their low before others, right? Like there's a chance that some, of course, have already bottomed on their USD pairs, and I've maintained that for over a year. But again, the issue, the underlying issue is still there, and that is they continue to mostly bleed on their Bitcoin pairs, and the opportunity cost of holding them is still quite high. If you think about where the Bitcoin dominance is today, it's currently at 47.73%. Now, this might sound low to you. Okay, you might think like, well, Ben's been going on about the Bitcoin dominance forever and it's below 48%. But I think there's some recency bias there. Remember, the dominance 2.5 months ago was at 43%. Okay, 4% lower than where it is today. Only 2.5 months ago. I mean, so think about this. 10 weeks ago, 10 weeks, the dominance was basically at 43%. Only 10 weeks ago. Which feels like an eternity in crypto, does it not? I mean, it certainly feels like an eternity. But it was only 10 weeks ago when the dominance was at 43%. And ever since then, we've talked about this idea of being in this long consolidation window. Now, when we first moved into this range back in March, we suggested that this could play out similar to how the prior consolidation ranges have played out, right? We said that many times. And the idea, if you look at this on the daily time frame, the general idea is that, and let's overlay the 100-day moving average, is that the dominance moves up, and after it moves up, it consolidates. And in early 2023, we saw it pull all the way down to the 100-day moving average, and then the dominance found renewed strength. And it went from 40% up to around 44 to 45%. Now, from here, from January until March, we also saw the dominance go down, right? It went sideways with a slightly bearish bias. The same thing in late 2022 and early 2023. Sideways with a slightly bearish bias. Consolidation until it hit the 100-day and then bounce to a new high. Okay, again, we saw the same thing again in early 2023 all the way until March. Consolidation, sideways movement with a slightly bearish bias until we hit the 100-day and then bounce. And you'll notice that this consolidation period here, it was actually a lot shorter than this consolidation period over here. When we moved up into this range, we said, look guys, there is a chance that we have to go into some type of consolidation mode until some of these longer term moving averages catch back up. That would allow things like the relative strength index, the RSI, to reset, and so on and so forth. So we've seen that again, right? It went all the way down to 42.87% or so, and then we got another bounce all the way up to around 49%. Now, since then, we've basically gone sideways. I would argue that we haven't even had a slightly bearish bias at this point. It's mostly just gone sideways. If anything, it's been higher lows. Unless you want to count this low and say that this one's a lower low compared to this one, but it depends on really what your time frame is. I mean, if you look at it like this, you could argue that the dominance has been in fact putting in slightly higher lows. And so when I think about what the dominance is doing, I think what's going on is there is this subtle shift of liquidity from the altcoin market back to Bitcoin. But it doesn't happen overnight, right? There's going to be periods where the altcoin market bounces back against Bitcoin, but Bitcoin in the end is where the liquidity ultimately ends up. And that is what continues to sustain the Bitcoin dominance at levels of 47%. If you think back only a few months ago, the dominance was all the way down here at 38%. And we suggested back then that we could see an inflection point in the dominance come September, because September is normally the time period when we see the dominance shift and go back the other way. I would put forth an idea right now, and I've said it for the last several months, that I think there is a high probability that we will see the dominance go up from here until around September. Okay, so you have July, you have the rest of June, but then you have July and then August, okay? And then at some point in September, we might actually see the dominance fall back again, okay? Now, in that scenario, I would still think that the dominance would likely put in a macro higher low, and then sometime during the halving year, the Bitcoin dominance goes up to even newer, to even low or newer highs, not macro new highs. Like, I don't think it's going to go back to like 99%. But I think you could see it go back up. The reason is because Bitcoin leads the bull market historically, right? It's not the other way around. That's just the way it's always worked. I think it's likely going to continue like that, is that Bitcoin leads the bull market, okay? Now, I want to address a few things because I think there's a lot of really great questions come out of what we've seen go on in the most recent trend by Bitcoin and Bitcoin dominance, okay? One of the things I also want to point out, this is the 100-day moving average. We found support there. We've also been finding support at the bull market support band for the Bitcoin dominance, right? And what you'll notice is that even though Bitcoin USD is now testing its bull market support band, if I can just quickly pull that up, Bitcoin USD is testing the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA. It's slightly above it right now. What you'll notice, Bitcoin dominance has plenty of wiggle room. Okay, the bull market support band for the dominance is all the way from 46.37 to 46.41. So around 46.4%. is where we have the bull market support band for the Bitcoin dominance. Okay. So it has plenty of wiggle room. If Bitcoin were to fall, then you could see the dominance temporarily go down. We know that, right? If Bitcoin drops quickly enough, like if it just sells off, if let's say next week, if Bitcoin were to sell off 5 or 10%, then the dominance could temporarily go down, but it could still find support at the bull market support band, even if it does. Fundamentally, I would still argue that during times of macro uncertainty like we're in right now, high uncertainty, times are always uncertain, but high uncertainty, I would argue that liquidity is going from the altcoin market to the blue chips, and mainly Bitcoin, although you could make the case that some has gone to Ethereum as well. We're going to talk about that. We're going to also talk about that. There's no denying it, that there has been some flight to safety, relative safety with Ethereum, although I would still argue that Bitcoin is the safer place at this phase of the cycle. Okay, but again, I mean, congratulations to Ethereum for holding up as well as it has so far, right? I mean, credit where credit is due. It has held up much better than I thought it was going to at this point, at least when I'm talking about its Bitcoin pair. It doesn't mean that it's going to continue, but at least so far it has, right? Now, one thing I want to talk about, because I've seen this question come up a few times, and I think it's worth addressing. One thing that we notice is that the dominance tends to go up when Bitcoin bounces, right? We've seen that before. Bitcoin USD, when it bounced off the 20-week SMA back in March, it bounced here back in March at around 20K, 19K or so. What happened? The dominance shot up, right? The dominance went from 43% all the way to 47, 48%, all the way up to 49%, really. So that says to me that if Bitcoin holds the line, right? Crypto is just a bunch of if-then statements, right? If Bitcoin holds the line and bounces, whether it's a new high or not is irrelevant, right? It just if it holds the line and bounces back up, whether it's a new high or not, it doesn't matter. It's just if it bounces off the 20-week, that says to me the dominance will go up with it. Look today, right? I mean, Bitcoin USD is up almost 4%. The dominance is up from 47.26% all the way up to 47.75. I mean, it's gone about 0.5% today when Bitcoin USD was going up. So if Bitcoin USD holds the line, then the dominance should continue higher because the altcoin market will likely struggle to catch a bid. Okay? A brief segue for a minute, right? Total 3. Total 3 today is only up 0.95%. So you have Bitcoin, which is up almost 4%. The altcoin market, total 3, is up less than 1%. The altcoin market is struggling to catch a bid, which again tells me that the reason that Bitcoin is continuing to do so well this year is mostly due to liquidity from the altcoin market going back to Bitcoin. Because if liquidity as a whole was coming into the Cryptoverse, we would expect the altcoin market to be doing a lot better, just like it was in 2020 when it was holding the line as well. Remember back over here, Bitcoin was holding the line and Total 3 was holding the line. Today, Total 3 is not holding the line, right? It fell below it months ago. And so again, you have to ask yourself, if Bitcoin USD is going up because of new liquidity to the space, then what's going on with the altcoin market? Okay, because normally when a lot of new liquidity comes in, at least through retail, you will see the altcoin market at least try to keep pace with Bitcoin in terms of staying above its 20-week. Now, it doesn't always keep pace in the short term if Bitcoin goes parabolic, but if Bitcoin's holding the line and liquidity is coming into the market, you would expect Total 3 to also be holding the line. The fact that Total 3 is not holding the line again suggests that there's a move from the relative riskier assets in the altcoin market to the blue chips of, say, Bitcoin and or Ethereum. But again, to me, the Bitcoin trade is much more clear than the Ethereum trade right now, right? At least right now. Okay. I would be subject to change my mind on that later this year, early next year, but at least for right now, I still think that the Bitcoin is the safer place to go. So we've seen the altcoin market continue to bleed back to Bitcoin. Look at it like this. Total 3 is only about 5% from the 20 or from its March low. Only about 5%. Bitcoin has held up much better at this point, right? I mean, it's still 26% away from its March low, right? A huge difference there. So one of the things that we've talked about, right, is that if Bitcoin were to hold the line here, and recently it did get a brief bounce back up, note that total 3 couldn't even be bothered to get back above its 20-week SMA during that bounce by Bitcoin USD, which is something we suggested could happen considering that total 3 was really showing an inability to show any strength, right? I mean, we've seen that play out for the last several months. Okay, so you have the dominance of Bitcoin in a long consolidation period, not that dissimilar from what we saw back in December and January, and then in February and March. And then we've also seen it here as well, right? Just long consolidation. We're allowing these longer term moving averages to catch up. We're allowing the RSI to reset. And what's happening? The dominance is still holding its own, okay? So what have we covered so far? If Bitcoin USD holds the line, then the dominance should go up. We've seen this. In fact, you could look at a correlation of this, right? Like look at if you overlay here, let's overlay Bitcoin dominance onto this chart. You will see that there has been a strong correlation between when Bitcoin USD goes up and when the Bitcoin dominance goes up, right? I mean, just look at the chart, right? I mean, this over here is Bitcoin USD, and this up here is the Bitcoin dominance, right? And what you notice is that as Bitcoin USD goes up, so too does the dominance. You'll also see that since April, Bitcoin USD has been trending down and putting in lower lows. Though you could argue that Bitcoin dominance has actually been doing a bit better, right? Like it hasn't been as bearish as Bitcoin USD. Just look at it, right? I mean, in general, I know that this low here is slightly lower than this one, but in general, Bitcoin dominance has been trending higher while Bitcoin USD has been trending lower. Going back to the thesis that the dominance should go up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, right? No matter the direction, whether Bitcoin goes up, whether it goes down, whether 31K is the yearly high or not, right? The Bitcoin dominance should go up no matter what, because that is where we are in the market cycle, right? That's where we are. So if you look at this chart, it shows pretty clearly that if Bitcoin holds the line and rallies off the 20-week, then the dominance should go screaming higher, okay? Now, what if Bitcoin falls below the 20-week like it did in 2019? Because what we've seen on some local timeframes is that as Bitcoin USD goes down, we've seen things like Ether Bitcoin go up. Have we not? Right? And there have been some altcoins that on lower timeframes have in fact gone up when Bitcoin USD went down. We've seen it, okay? It's not that hard to see if you're looking at the market in real time. There have been days where Bitcoin was down 3 or 4% and the dominance was also down. Now, still, the dominance has done pretty well, all things considered, but there are some days where that is the case. Why is that? Well, we've talked about this before, okay? I will remind you, there is a distinct difference between price action of the altcoin market when Bitcoin is above its bull market support band and when it's below, okay? When Bitcoin is above its 20-week SMA, normally the altcoin market actually outperforms Bitcoin, okay? Normally. And this is what you'll hear me say when we get into 2024 and 2025. For the most part, what you'll hear me say, except for a potential parabolic rally by Bitcoin, what you'll hear me say for the most part is that when Bitcoin's above its 20-week, and going sideways, we would expect the altcoin market to outperform Bitcoin. Okay? That is the general expectation in the halving year and the post-halving year, is that when Bitcoin USD is above its 20-week SMA and going sideways, we would expect the altcoin market to outperform Bitcoin as a collective. Where that relationship breaks down is in the pre-halving year, okay? In fact, if you go back and look, and I showed this, I don't have the chart handy right now, but in one of the recent videos I showed this. If you go back and look at every single time in history when Bitcoin USD was from weekly close above the 20-week to weekly close below, Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation has always outperformed it, except for the pre-halving year in 2019. Always. Ethereum has always outperformed Bitcoin from weekly close above the 20-week estimate by Bitcoin USD to weekly close below. And you might say, well, what about this time, right? I mean, Ethereum's been doing very well recently, and the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is back above 0.07. So hasn't Ethereum been outperforming Bitcoin USD since Bitcoin got above the 20-week? The answer is no, it has not. It's recency bias to assume that it has. You can see that Bitcoin got above its 20-week back on the week of January 9th. And the week of January 9th for Ethereum, you can see that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation was at about 0.075. So the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is actually down since then, right? It's actually down. Going in line with the idea, even from 2019, that during the pre-halving year, when Bitcoin's going sideways above the 20-week, you still often see Bitcoin outperform, okay? It's the pre-halving year. It's different than the halving year and the post-halving year. This is the year where both sides get wrecked. Typically speaking, this is the year where both sides get wrecked, both bulls and bears. And then we all come together in the halving year and the post-halving year. Historically speaking, everyone gets bullish and we go to higher levels. Now, could this time be different? Guys, anything could happen, right? I mean, there's been all sorts of things that have happened in these markets. We should not discredit any idea. You should always consider all possible outcomes. I think that even if you consider all possible outcomes, you should go back to the ones that you think are the most likely. And for me, the one that's most likely is that the dominance goes up. So again, if Bitcoin holds the line, the dominance likely rallies. If Bitcoin does not hold the line, then what happens to the dominance? Because on some lower time frames, the Bitcoin dominance has gone down when Bitcoin USD goes down. But remember that we have not had a weekly close below the 20-week SMA since January. So as long as Bitcoin's above the 20-week, we have seen altcoins try to hold on to their Bitcoin valuations because Bitcoin's above the 20-week. So there's this hope, right, that Bitcoin can hold. But if Bitcoin goes below the bull market support band, usually the altcoin market throws in the towel and says, enough is enough. There's nothing left to do. One of the things I've said before is that one of the things that Bitcoin does is that it goes up and during that period of going up, it shakes the altcoin market off their Bitcoin pairs so that when Bitcoin goes down, those altcoins have nowhere to hide, right? You could kind of almost think about the same thing with regards to Bitcoin USD and Total 3. I mean, Bitcoin has went up. It faded back to the 20-week SMA, but Total 3 is already below the 20-week SMA. So if Bitcoin falls below the 20-week, then there's nowhere for the altcoin market to hide on their USD pairs, and there's certainly nowhere for them to hide on their Bitcoin pairs, right? So it all comes back to this idea of what happens if Bitcoin does not hold the line? What happens? Well, I will remind you that the dominance can go up when Bitcoin is below the 20-week. It can. Even though it feels like when Bitcoin goes down, it feels like the dominance only ever goes down. But I will remind you that during this period over here, the dominance went up. Bitcoin was going down, but the dominance was going up. And if you look at it, right, if we overlay the dominance, you can see the dominance was going up during this period, even though Bitcoin USD was going down. So I can't help but come back to this same idea of in either outcome, in either scenario, whether Bitcoin holds the line or it doesn't, which no one knows, right? No one can, no one fully knows what will happen. Of course, you have the bull case, you have the bear case. No one knows what will happen. If we hold the line, the dominance should go up. That's what it's been doing all year long. If we don't hold the line, the dominance should go up as well. Now, there could be a lag, right? It might not go up like that minute or that day, but if we fail to hold the line, just like 2019, the dominance should also continue to slowly go up. So you might wonder, well, again, what are the bull cases and the bear cases for Bitcoin USD? Well, we've covered that, right? I mean, there's plenty of bear cases, right? There's like the recession risk, although the unemployment rate is still relatively low, so you could argue that people have gotten ahead of themselves on that. There's the regulatory risk. There's a number of bearish scenarios. The bullish scenarios, of course, could be, if people got too ahead of the recession bet, then risk assets can sort of have these rallies going into a recession. The other bull case for Bitcoin USD is the fact that the dominance is not above the range high, right? And we've talked about this a lot, right? Until the dominance gets above the range high, then you could argue there is sufficient liquidity from the altcoin market to justify localized or the return of strength. Even if it's short-term return of strength, it could still justify it. Remember, in 2018, Bitcoin USD, right? If you look at these prior range highs, look at this. Let me overlay Bitcoin USD on here. In 2018, the rally by Bitcoin USD lasted until the dominance range high was broken. It was a slightly lower high on Bitcoin USD, but it was still a rally, right? I mean, like, it would be like if Bitcoin rallied back up to 29K or something, it's still a lower high, but it doesn't mean that it's not a rally, right? And that could break the dominance above 49%, right? That was the lower high back over here in 2018. If you look in 2019, you'll see that Bitcoin USD rallied until the dominance broke the range high. It did it on a Bitcoin pump, okay? Whether it's a new local high or not is irrelevant. In 2019, it was a new local high. In 2018, it was not. But again, I would put forth this idea that it's irrelevant if it's a new local high or not, right? Whether it goes to 29K, 27K, 32K, 35K, it's not that relevant. The important point for investors is that, at least in my opinion, right? It's not financial list, but in my opinion, and I've been wrong about things, so I could be wrong about this too, but in my opinion, no matter what, whether we hold the line or not, the dominance should go up because people will seek out the relative safety of Bitcoin over the altcoin market. And as long as there's enough liquidity coming from the altcoin market, it can continue to prop up the USD valuation of Bitcoin. But at some point, there will no longer be sufficient liquidity in the altcoin market to prop up the USD valuation of Bitcoin, and that's where it will fail to hold the line, and then we get our secondary scare. My guess is the recession scare before we go into, a bull market that could theoretically take us to new highs. That's my opinion, right? I mean, again, there's all sorts of theories out there, some of which include the idea that Bitcoin, would rally to new highs sooner. Okay, I'm not really a believer in new highs this year. I don't think that's going to happen, but there are theories out there that say that's going to happen. And the reason they put that theory out there is because, if everyone's bearish, then that means that it's an overcrowded trade and the pain trade is up. The pain trade could be up, but it doesn't mean that it's going to go up to new highs. I mean, you still have to have sufficient liquidity to send these things to new highs. So that I think is the bull case for Bitcoin USD is just simply that the dominance has not broken the range high. It's still at 47.77% or so. Now, what happens if and when the dominance breaks the range high, which is not very much higher? I mean, just another 1.2% or so, and we're looking at the dominance at 49%. Now, really, the range high is around 49.23% if you zoom in to really what was going on back over here, right? We went all the way up to about 49.23% or so. So there does exist a scenario where you see the dominance get to that level, and then once the dominance breaks 49.23%, or just somewhere between 49 and 50%, right? Once it gets to that level, you could argue that the collective altcoin market has been broken off of their Bitcoin support levels, and then when Bitcoin corrects after that point, then the altcoin market has nowhere to hide because they've already lost all the liquidity because people traded their alts for Bitcoin, they traded their alts for USD because they were scared about a recession. They didn't want to deal with regulatory risk, and then when Bitcoin corrects, the altcoin market struggles to catch a bid. Okay, so we've been in this holding pattern for a long time where the dominance is just in this long consolidation where it hasn't done anything. And, anytime it comes back, I get a lot of messages saying, what's going on with the dominance? But I would still say, like, this is still, to me, this just looks like some type of consolidation period before ultimately wanting to break out to much higher levels, right? It has sort of been putting in higher lows here, which is different than what we've seen go on in most of the rest of the market. The other way to look at this is to look at total 3 divided by the Bitcoin market cap. And we've talked about this a lot as well, in that it looks to me like it's an oscillator, right? Let me remove, if I remove the lines, to me it very much looks to be an oscillator. And it almost looks like, this Wyckoff distribution up here of the altcoin market relative to Bitcoin. And then the only thing left to do is at some point we should fade it back down to these levels, meaning the altcoin market bleeds back to Bitcoin, no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. And I think that's the thing that catch people off guard a lot, is they think that, they fall into one of two camps. They think that the Bitcoin dominance only goes up if Bitcoin goes down, or they think the Bitcoin dominance only goes up if Bitcoin goes up. But in reality, what I'm saying and what I've said for a long time is that the dominance should go up no matter what direction Bitcoin goes. Okay? Whether it goes to 35K or 15K, the dominance should go higher. If it goes to 35K, then the altcoin market will struggle to catch a bid because people just FOMO into Bitcoin. And if it goes to 15K and the altcoin market liquidity is completely dried up, then they could go down a lot quicker than you can possibly imagine, right? So these are the issues that I think are at play, and it's why I continue to say that, Bitcoin heavy, once you realize the highs are in, right? Like Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolio, and then have a heavy cash stack in case we do get that secondary fade into a recession. That's one way to navigate these markets. Not that it's financial advice, right? It's not. It's just that's one way to navigate these markets, is to just think like, well, there's opportunity cost. If you want exposure to crypto, Bitcoin tends to be the safer play during this phase of the cycle because the dominance should go up no matter what. And if you think about it, having a Bitcoin heavy portfolio, the idea is that if you wanted to buy altcoins, you could buy them later on with Bitcoin and or US dollars, right? If the altcoin goes down against US dollars, you might want to buy it with US dollars. If it goes down against Bitcoin, you might want to buy it with Bitcoin. But that's the general idea. And if you take a look at a lot of the altcoins, I mean, look today, right? A lot of these altcoins are down on their Bitcoin pairs. Take a look at ADA Bitcoin. I mean, to me, this just looks like a macro downtrend, right? Look at dot Bitcoin. I mean, it's getting close to these range lows back from 2020. Link Bitcoin slowly fading back down to its June low. If you think that it has to hold that, I would say, hey, maybe not. If you look at Aave Bitcoin, it's already fallen below its summer of 2022 lows. Look at Solana Bitcoin. This is another great example of one that will get these short-term rallies, and then guess what? They ultimately just fall short of the bull market support band and then get faded down once again. Look at AVAX Bitcoin, right? I mean, it used to have support here, and then eventually it fell below. We got one more fake out right to the 20-week SMA, only to get rejected. And it just continues to bleed, right? So, I mean, some of these altcoins, you might say, well, when is the altcoin market going to put in a new low? Against Bitcoin, many of them are right now. I mean, AVAX is putting in new lows. Aave is putting in new lows. BNB is potentially starting to take out this low right here. Uni Bitcoin is slowly pushing to new lows. Dot Bitcoin seems to put in a new low almost every other week. ADA Bitcoin is still off its March low, but I would put forth the idea that give it a few more weeks and it probably too will also be putting in a new low. So, it still comes back to this idea of the altcoin market is struggling, and there's just not a lot of liquidity to support the altcoin market, but there is some of this idea that the altcoin market liquidity is just sort of flowing back to Bitcoin because people just throw in the towel in the altcoin market. They don't care anymore, and they just go back to Bitcoin. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have said, well, the altcoin market, the altcoin is 30% off its low, or 20% off its low. Like take ADA, for example, ADA USD. Where is it off its low right here? From this low here, it's currently 48% off of its low. And my point is, well, so what? Bitcoin off its low is up 72%, which is why the ADA Bitcoin valuation continues to slowly go lower. Okay, yes, altcoins can rally on their USD pairs if Bitcoin goes up. If Bitcoin holds the line at the 20-week and goes up, whether it puts in a new high or not, or a local high or not, like if it takes out 31K, or if it doesn't, then the altcoin market on their USD pairs can slowly go back up, but it doesn't mean they're going to go take out their highs from April, right? Again, total 3 is well below the 20-week SMA, well below it. Total 2 is below it. Total is right at it, slightly below it. Bitcoin is above it. So what does it show? It shows you that Bitcoin is where a lot of the strength is coming from right now, not the altcoin market. Okay. Now there is Ethereum that has shown some strength. I mean, you can see that the valuation of Ether Bitcoin is at 0.0701. One thing that we've talked about before as well is that if you look at it over longer time periods, I still think this is just a long distribution phase of the Ether Bitcoin valuation. One of the things that we followed back in the bull market was this 20-month SMA. You can see that, Ether Bitcoin rallied above it and came back down, held it as support, at least on a monthly time frame, with 2 weeks below. We sort of had a fake out right here. Then we actually got those weekly closes below it. And now we're potentially back testing that 20-month SMA. So look, I know a lot of people don't like that I have this view, but I still do think that Ethereum will bleed back to Bitcoin. One other way to look at this as well, and believe me, I am running out of ammo on this, the longer that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation holds up. But one other way to look at this is that once the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation rallied here, it took what? It was in the 12th month that it finally started to go down. So if you take this rally up here, I mean, we're almost 12 months later. I mean, it's currently month 11, right? But I mean, it hit this local high and started already coming back down before it got into the 12th month. So, I'm still of the opinion that Ether will bleed back to Bitcoin. The fact that it hasn't done so yet is somewhat impressive. But I still think at the end of the day, that is ultimately the most likely outcome. The other thing that I think is worthwhile to look at is the Bitcoin dominance plus the Ethereum dominance, because that's actually still fairly obviously bullish, right? It just is more, one green candle in a row. I mean, or just 4 in a row now. If we look at it on a lower time frame, you can see that today the Bitcoin dominance and Ethereum dominance is actually up quite a bit. Okay. And I would argue is likely to go back potentially to 85%, potentially. Okay. I mean, I know people say, well, this time is different, but I don't know. You tell me. To me, it just looks like an oscillator. This is the Bitcoin dominance plus Ethereum dominance. So if you're an ETH maxi, you can still look at this chart and like it, right? You could just say, well, the reason it's going to go up is because Ethereum's dominance is going to go up, not Bitcoin. But again, I would say that Bitcoin's dominance is more likely to play a critical role here in getting this all the way back up to around 85% or so. So, these are, of course, a lot of different perspectives to sort of take in. But, I mean, at the end of the day, the argument has not changed. It's been the same for a long time. And that is the dominance should go up no matter what. The altcoin market should bleed against Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin goes up or down. In the pre-halving year, normally we get about half green, half red. So far, we've had 4 green months and 1 red month. I'd still say there's some flexibility there to maybe have a couple more green months, right? It could happen. We probably will at least have 1 or 2 more green months this year. Does it come now? Or does it come maybe in like October or August or something like that? I don't know. But I still think that this is the year where the altcoin market liquidity slowly bleeds back to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin dominance slowly goes higher. It's just a very long process. And one of the reasons, arguably, that it's taking a lot longer to play out this cycle than it did last time is just because there's been so much more liquidity in the system this time than last time. And that's what happens when the Fed prints, $6 trillion. It just takes a lot longer for that liquidity to dry back up, go back to the blue chips, seek relative safety, and then for those blue chips to then eventually roll over because that liquidity is drying up and the altcoin market can no longer support the valuations of those blue chips on their Bitcoin pairs. I think we'll wrap it up there. Actually, no, we're not. One more thing. Dominance excluding stables, by the way, is at 52.19%. Higher lows since May of 2021, and really higher lows since January of 2018, if we're being technically correct. But even if you don't want to consider that, it's still been putting in higher lows. So I would say that, turning bullish on the dominance in Q1 of 2022, you can see that excluding stables, the dominance has just been moving higher. And I can't tell you how many people, take the other side of this, take the other side of the bet and say that they think the dominance is going to go down because they look at it with including stable coins and think that think that the altcoin market is holding up well. But remember, excluding stables, the dominance has just been putting in higher lows since May of 2021. Okay? And really, if you didn't get bullish on the dominance here, then by early 2022, there's pretty clear confirmation here that we were holding the line on the Bitcoin dominance and that it was slowly moving higher. And it has been slowly moving higher ever since. If you look at a 30-day SMA, you can see that we've been building out this pretty big base over here. And rather than just kind of coming up here and then coming back down, we've been holding these levels up here. And then look at a 90-day moving average, right? Building out a pretty big base and slowly moving higher. So I think that we are going to have a substantial breakout of the dominance within the next few weeks, okay? We talked about getting a consolidation period that could last a few months, but at this point, the 100-day moving average is mostly caught up. The 20-week SMA still needs a few more weeks to catch up, but I think the consolidation period will be coming to an end relatively soon, no matter what happens with Bitcoin, and we should break above 49%, and that should usher in the final stages of the altcoin reckoning, which is in reference to altcoin performance on their Bitcoin pairs. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.